go ahead and jump right into our agenda. Thank you, everyone, for carving out some time this evening, and thanks to those of you that provided us some feedback and comments on the definitions. We do want to spend a good part of our discussion today really sharpening the pencil on those definitions. And then we'll also, well, let me show you the agenda. So we'll talk about some unresolved issues surrounding those definitions. And then we'll get into the McKenzie conflicts, which we introduced you to those issues at our last meeting. We didn't, in the course of that meeting, make any decisions on exactly how to address those conflicts. So what we have since done has been to recommend how to address those conflicts. So I want to walk you through those. And fortunately, there's really not that many. And I think most of the solutions are pretty straightforward, but a couple of them do require some discussion. We'll show you some graphics we got started with, and we're starting with just updating what you currently have. And I'd like to talk about your impressions as to where the needs are within the regulations to provide new graphics that might help tell the story. And then, as we usually do, we'll talk about our next steps. So where we are at in this process, we are kind of all through task 1.1 through 1.5. And this is where all the work is in, bringing your existing regulations into the new format and resolving a lot of the issues that exist within them. And task 1.6, 1.7 are still a couple of months away. And so before we wrap up today, I'll give you a layout the next couple of months for you so you know what to expect. So the definitions, Keith gave us some very thorough comments. We received comments from 2 or 3 of you as well, or 4, and we've tried our best to go through all those comments and address all those issues within the draft document that we have. We do have some outstanding questions that I'd like to discuss this evening. But before I get into the specifics, I'd like to hear from you as to, what you found challenging about the organization. We started talking about this a little bit already. It's clearly separated out into zoning terminology and then uses. That's obviously something that I've done before and I recommend. And I'll quickly explain the reasons for that. But that being said, you're going to be using these regulations and we want to organize them in a way that's going to best serve you. So if you prefer the alphabetical list of everything, we could certainly do that. Now, the justification in separating out the uses from the zoning terminology is that it can be beneficial to have a list of your uses with the associated definitions all in one place. It just makes it easier to sift through it. If you're really just interested in finding out what the definition of a use, there's less clutter to sift through in terms of all the terminology that is not a use and maybe could potentially be confused with a use. And so that's the reason we like to keep those separate. We keep terminology like what a setback or an abutter is separate from a use, such as single-family residential. But that's the purpose. There's a bit of a learning curve sometimes in remembering that there are 2 different sections. You're working with a document that's not in its final format, which means it doesn't have headers or footers that will help remind you what section of the definitions you're in. I think the final formatted version would have a header that would remind you which section of the definitions that you were in. That may be helpful. So with that being said, I'd like to open up to all of you to tell me what wasn't working, what was working for you.
Okay. ahead, Fred.
Shall I go first?
Sure.
Yes, please.
Okay. The separation of uses from the definitions, I think, makes perfect sense. I found that helpful. I think others will as well. The problem that I was talking about earlier was in grouping terms such as building terms, landscaping terms, so forth and so on. Had a lot of trouble understanding why some things were in those groups, why some things were not. And I didn't think that was as helpful as simply an alphabetical listing.
Did you find that we tried to cross-reference all of those, realizing maybe there were a few that we had missed, and in which case it said, so if you were to go to something like building coverage, and it's instead grouped with building terms or coverage terms, it said see that section. Did you find that helpful or just cumbersome?
Well, helpful if you're looking for the definition. Cumbersome, I guess, in that you have to go two places to find your definition. I guess the way to put it is I didn't find the groupings as helpful as they might have been, and part of it was, as I said, I'm trying to understand what was in the group and what was not in the group, and why. It just raised questions. I think it was my personal opinion was a straight alphabetical listing of definitions would work best. But then I'm sort of old school, so.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay. And what we're referring to is what we've called the nesting of the definition.
Yes.
By example, and I'm looking at them now on the side screen here. Coverage terms. We had impervious coverage and effective impervious coverage grouped together. Another example, dwelling terms, attached dwelling, detached dwelling, dwelling unit, efficiency unit, residence, all grouped together because they are references to a type of dwelling. And flood terms, probably our largest group, and we had all of those grouped together in one place. With flood terms, I mean, there's over 20 individual definitions that comprise that category. And the benefit of having it all together is if you're really focused on flood-related issues, all of those references are in one place, and it's easy to compare one term against the other because they're next to each other. Yeah. The disadvantage is you go to its natural place in the alphabetical order, and it's not there. You have to go to another page.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't mind that grouping so much. I can see the advantage of it if you're trying to look into a specific issue to have all of the relevant definitions grouped together like that. And it seemed like they were well referenced. Anytime you were looking for it in alphabetical order, it would be there and just tell you to go somewhere else. So it's not as if it was so difficult to find them, I thought.
I like the groupings. I think they make a lot of sense to nest them. It makes sense to me.
One of the things that we do intend to do, and this will only be useful if you're using the digital document, is to create hyperlinks so that if it says see coverage terms, you, instead of having to scroll through the page, you just click on it and it would bring you to that spot in the definition straight there. Which, I mean, it's not helpful if you have a hard copy print, but if you're viewing it online, it would expedite things.
Right. And Keith, how do you feel about the?
I think they're helpful. Maybe it's a little bit of an, learning curve as far as where they are, or even like, what to put in there. But when it comes to things like the flood terms, there are a lot of these different terms like start of construction, where otherwise you might be wondering like, what's this big definition about start of construction? But it's a flood term that relates to FEMA's requirements.
Oh.
And when it comes to the floor area terms, those are all grouped together because they all go into how we calculate gross floor area
Mhm.
for the purpose of our floor area ratio regulations. So you can see from that how complicated our floor area regulations can be because there's half a dozen definitions that go into it. And maybe that's something that will be addressed later on in phase 2. But you have to know what a basement is versus a cellar, because a cellar doesn't count towards gross floor area and a basement does, and all those different terms like that. So to me, the nesting is helpful.
I learned that most of what I've been calling basements for my life are really cellars.
Right, at least in our definitions, they are.
Right. Right.
Yep.
Okay. Now that while we're discussing flood terms, what we have also done, because it's a group of terms that's really very specific to one section of the regulations, your floodplain regulations. What we have sometimes done is present those definitions within that section of the regulations, rather than have them be at the end in a glossary in the definitions section, so that it's right there with all of the regulations and it's more accessible, and it tends to crowd the definitions less as well. We're not adding lots of page count to the definitions. So that's also an option. We sometimes also do that with signage terms. We'll put those right into the signage section of the regulations. So I wonder if anyone has thoughts on that, on extracting some of this terminology that's specific to one section of the regulations and instead locating it within that section of the regulations.
I feel like as long as it's consistent, if it's flood and signs, I don't know if there's any other topics that have their own regulations that would need that too. So I guess I lean towards having it just in the big definition section because of that, but I'm sure it could work.
I think it would make more sense having a larger overall definition section so people can go right there, know where to look.
Ryan, is that you? Can you speak up somehow?
Yeah, sorry, maybe I think it's good where they have it in the definitions, and as opposed to nested like that. I think it's just easier for most folks who are looking through this, even whether it's in paper or online, they'll know where to go for definitions, instead of kind of hopping and skipping, but that's just my perception.
I'd agree with that. I mean, I know we want to get our page count down, but perhaps those definitions could be in both places, if that would ease, the user experience. But I do think it makes a lot of sense to have all of our definitions able to be found in one place.
Well, if you get into, for instance, the regulations regarding floods and how we deal with that, and simply a cross-reference to the definition section, that should get you there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially with the hyperlinks.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
More and more people just look at these online and don't look at a printed book.
Any other comments? Lynn, Chuck, Gary?
Yep, this is Lynn. So I've been listening, and we've referred to hyperlinks a number of times. My experience with large documents is that hyperlinks often don't work. And so are we certain that we will be able to maintain the hyperlinks in a living document, because if we set this up so we're highly dependent upon them and then they don't work, it's more frustrating.
Yeah.
That's a good
Yeah,
point.
that's an understandable concern. I think I find the biggest issue with hyperlinks are links that are linking to an external document or site, and those can break very easily. But links within a document, if that document is set up properly, and we know how to do that, and we can show your staff how to maintain those. We have not had any issues at all with those, decaying, malfunctioning, or whatever, because as long as they remain within internal links and not linking out to a separate document or site.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
well, as long as the town feels they can support, the town staff feels that they can support the document going further with the hyperlinks, then I'm all for it. And I personally think, having things grouped with the hyperlinks makes things very easy for people. But again, if those I just want people to understand, and maybe Keith, it would make some sense to go around and look if there's other town documents that are built using many, many hyperlinks that may be changed over time, if that has been a problem for the staff, because there's nothing worse than thinking it's working and it's not. And it's a risk, so might be good just to ask. I don't know if we have other town documents that have been built in this manner with hyperlinks, Keith?
I don't know that we do, especially for regulations. But yeah, especially if we do regulation amendments over the years, we'd have to make sure of that.
Well, the other
Right.
question, Keith, was, do we have the horsepower to maintain all of this once we set it up? Do we have somebody who can do that on staff?
I think so, especially because they are internal links. It's just sort of part of the document, where no one's changing a website on you or anything like that. So it shouldn't be bad. I think, like I said, like if there are future regulation amendments where we change things in the future, we'd have to be careful not to mess things up.
Yep.
I do agree that when you control both ends of the hyperlink, they're really easy to maintain. They don't require coding experience or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
So
we are building this document in Microsoft Word, so we're not using a proprietary type graphic design software package that the town doesn't have or is unlikely to maintain a subscription to. So we're using a very well-established platform that the town will, I imagine, have a license for a long, long time. And we are also scoped to do some training with how to use these regulations. So within that, we could build in some time to ensure that Keith and any other town staff knows exactly how to edit and maintain the document, because there are some very strict rules that we use with respect to formatting to ensure that all the numbers show up correctly, and the hyperlinks work and the cross-references work. And that document needs to be maintained properly if amendments are made, so that all those automatic things continue to happen automatically and accurately. So we can take some time to train staff as to how to maintain the document itself.
This has been, maybe in the first year or two after rolling this out, we could get a line item budget for some maintenance with you, Francisco, annually to
We're happy to do that as well.
make sure we can keep the gears meshed, as it were.
Okay, so I'm hearing we're going to move forward with the approach that we've taken. We'll use hyperlink to try to ease things, and we'll make sure that those work and continue to work. So with that being said, I'd like to get into some nuance here because there are a number of items that we had not yet resolved. You know, there are many items Keith was able to give us very clear direction on, or from your comments, we received very clear direction. We knew how to proceed with respect to how to manage that definition. Do we keep it? Do we modify it? Do we merge it? Do we get rid of it, et cetera? But we still have a number of definitions that we're not quite sure what to do with yet. So let's go through those one by one and to give you a sense of what we have in store for us. I've got about a dozen slides to this effect. All right, starting with certification of erosion and sediment control. And the blue text there is the exact wording from your regulations right now. And Keith brought it to my attention that there is no mention of this in the regulations outside of this definition, and that this is something that has not been used or rarely ever has certification been issued. So I'd like to get everyone's permission just to get rid of this, or if we think we need to keep it, let us know what we need to do.
Yeah, I should say that like the regulations on erosion and sedimentation control do mention the word certification, but they just mention it as an approval, which is how it's always been done, is basically the commission just approves the erosion and sedimentation control plan as part of a site plan, but doesn't talk about it as the specific document or separate certification that is signed by the commission. This definition is the only place that really mentions it in that way.
Do we maybe, this is Ryan, perhaps, do we maybe define certification in the definitions as an approval versus certification, if that's what you're explaining it really is, Keith? Does that make sense?
I think so. I don't know if there'd need to be a definition of it.
Is this something to do with DEP, meaning signing off on some state regulation?
You know, I don't think there's anything in the statutes that talks about a specific certification like that.
I don't either. There is a state regulation, but I don't think it gets into certification by the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Right. I wouldn't, so we could pull it, and fine by me to pull it.
To me, it doesn't seem like a definition that's needed because we still have the whole section 7.6 about erosion and sedimentation control standards and what the commission needs to look for and approve.
Then it would make sense to remove it, I think.
Yep.
Okay.
We have to find elsewhere. Yeah.
I agree.
I agree with you too.
I do as well.
All right, very good.
Same.
We're getting off to a great start here. All right, new construction. Your current definition of new construction are structures that started construction after December 28, 1961. How is this definition used, and is that still the relevant definition?
It's the term new construction is used a lot in the regulations. I don't know where that date came from.
Must be the adoption date of the regs, the first adoption date of the regs, right?
It seems like they were adopted a few months before that.
July 20th
Yeah.
originally. Okay.
Shouldn't it just be a rolling date, if a date at all? Rolling meaning so many years back, not necessarily 1961.
Yeah, 1961 is like ancient history.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
We're trying to say
doesn't it
new
refer
construction.
to doesn't it refer to nonconformance? So I'll just take maybe Lord's Point as an example, where all the lots were divided up and it's non-conformant to the regs as of certain date, and so they don't have to follow the regs. I mean, isn't that what this is?
In cases like that, we always look to the July 15th, 1961, when zoning was adopted. So I don't know if back then there was some reason to have that particular date.
So if that's the case, then maybe it's not the definition itself that's removed, but it's amended to say July 1961.
Well,
Yeah, I
but
think we need it. We probably need some definition of new construction. I don't know.
Why?
yeah, why? I guess.
I mean, I'm sorry to be the.
So,
I-
It's just a term that's in the regulations
Yeah.
in a lot of different places.
Document. Yeah, there are 51 references to new construction.
Oh, all right, there we go. Okay.
So the question is, what does that mean? By example, buffer requirements. There are buffer requirements that say screening strip within buffer for all new construction adjoining. That's the type of references that we see, and that's in residential zones. It comes up 51 times, and so the real question is, well, what constitutes new construction? In my mind, that's any activity that is now starting, which is to say that these requirements are not applicable to something that's already built, but are applicable to construction that is taking place.
How about just any current building permit or approval? Meaning, because approvals are 19, can last on the books for 19 years, and someone may start one addition to that approval and then wait 15 years to do the rest of it, which is the new construction.
Yeah.
But again, let me just make sure I understand. So let's say something was built a long time ago, and we're dealing with buffers and things like that, and they're going to the ZBA. They refer to these regulations as well, and wouldn't they go back to the date of the regs being started, or construction after, before that time or after that time?
But
They would. It's probably not the only use of the term is to figure out if something's legally non-conforming or not.
Yeah, I'm just
Considering there's
thinking to
51
myself
references.
that, we can't just look at it as going forward for, well, I don't know.
It seems to me like there should be two definitions here. One that would be new construction in the more common sense interpretation of what new construction is. And as Ben said, maybe applies to anything that has an active permit. And then another that refers to construction pre-zoning regulations.
that is there, isn't it, as pre-existing? I mean, when we talk about pre-existing non-conforming,
Correct.
we're talking about the adoption of zoning regulations.
Right, you have a whole section that basically exempts anything that was constructed prior to adoption of the regulations from application of the regulations. So we already have all of that language in place.
Yeah.
One of the most common uses of new construction is to distinguish between permit requirements. By example, in Pawcatuck Village, there are certain types of uses that can be approved with the zoning permit approved by staff if they are occurring in an existing building. And a lot of those include retail uses, et cetera. However, a new construction, a use in a new construction has to be referred to the commission with a site plan or may require a special use permit. So that's, I think, the reference, it's new construction is most commonly used for that type of distinction, between a building that's already there and a new use coming into that building versus a new use coming into a new construction, a building being built for that new use. And what's distinguished there are the permits requirements for either. So that's the importance of that term. However, our definition of it does not suggest that. It suggests anything that had construction which started after 1961 is considered new construction.
Yeah, the definition is just any building that was built since zoning was adopted.
Yeah, is new construction, which means technically, you're, once again use Pawcatuck Village as an example. You allow a zoning permit with staff level approval for 1 to 3 dwelling units, bait and tackle sales, bowling, billiards, and it goes on down the list. And that says for changes of use in existing buildings. But if we're strictly adhering to our definition of new construction, if that building were built in 1962, it would actually be considered new construction, which would mean that new construction or building addition shall require commission approval, which would mean that staff can't technically approve that with the zoning permit. It needs to go to you.
It seems
makes sense.
like we just need a common sense definition of what new construction is, as most people mean it.
Yeah.
I would agree.
Which maybe other towns have.
Okay, so if we're in agreement that new construction does not apply to everything built since December 28, 1961, that it really should be new building activity, then what we could do is we could reference some other communities, other towns for the definition of new construction, and then come back to you with a proposed definition for that.
Sounds good.
That makes sense.
Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure there wasn't a very specific purpose for the reference to that date that was still effective for you.
I don't think so. Sometimes weird definitions relate to FEMA things, but I don't think going back to 1961 this has anything.
Okay. All right, good. Well, let's keep moving.
I am just got a comment in the chat from someone that it might be related to the ANSI standard that presented the first criteria for accessibility, but the specific date wasn't cited.
Okay.
I noticed there was another comment about why not have an index for the definitions too.
An index for the definitions. What would that, I mean, the definitions are a bit of an index. What do you suppose that would look like? Like just a list pointing to the page number? Is that it?
That's pretty redundant.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, maybe we ask whoever presented that comment for a little explanation as to what they were referring to.
That was me, Fred Bentamsky here. When there was discussion about having definitions in different places, perhaps, or in more than one place, if they would be, throughout the text, that to have just one index that would tell you what page number that definition would be found.
So if we were to start moving things around, like, let's say flood terms out and put those in the flood regulations section of the regs, that's the scenario where you would see the need for an index that lets us know what definitions are where. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. And
okay. Well,
yeah.
All right. And it may be that we don't end up going that route anyway, but we'll certainly keep that in mind. The importance to know where everything is.
I guess also though the fact that you're grouping the definitions under headings.
Right.
So that if we're used to being able to find a definition for something, you know, and if the definitions are still 30 pages long, it would be nice to know, have a page number for a word, if that word is defined under, in a different alphabetical area, so to speak, because it's in a group. That's all I have in mind.
Okay.
Thanks.
Is there a
I
way?
do think if people are using this electronically more and more, I mean, it's
Yeah.
in this day and age, people just use the search and, you know, they just control F. I use the search to find, you know, words. It's so easy now. So that's the way it's going electronically. It's
Yeah.
so easy, you know.
A question, could we find a means to highlight any word in the regulations for which there is a definition? So if you
That's a good idea.
got to say new construction, it would be in boldface or it would be in a different color or something. So you would know that there was a definition for it. And if you were really into it, you'd know to go look for it.
We can take a look at doing some things like that. We do want to try to use processes that are automated to the greatest extent possible so that we're not spending 20 hours, as you might imagine, going through each word and changing the color of it. So to the extent that we can automate that sort of thing with styles, we'll see what we can do to make it as intuitive as possible.
Yeah. Okay. Just a thought.
Sure.
I think that's a great suggestion. If there is and that's a great way to index things, particularly if you could click on it and it would go right to the definition.
Ooh, that would be nice.
Oh yeah, no, it would really make it very usable. But as Francisco points out, if we have to spend a half a lifetime developing it, it's maybe not so much.
Okay.
I have to tell you, that's what I thought we were talking about before, Fred. So thanks for clarifying. I thought that's what we were talking about, that the word would have a hyperlink and bring you to that
Right.
definition in the document. So
Okay.
that was my expectation. I mean, I think that's very standard in most web-based documents. So
Well-
anyways, thanks for clarifying, Fred.
Yeah, our challenge is that we have over a couple hundred terms, and they're repeated throughout the document many times. So we could easily be up to 1,000 links that need to be created and maintained pretty quick. So that's the real challenge. When I talked about hyperlinks earlier, and let me zoom in a little bit so I could tell you what I had in mind at least, was we have area sign, right? It's not on that page, and it says see sign terms. So my solution to this would have been where it says see this whole thing, you could click on it and it would bring you to the sign terms page of the definition. So it would be really keeping all those hyperlinks focused for all these cross-referenced definitions.
Well,
Which
yeah. Okay. I mean,
That's half the battle.
which is, now we're talking about a list of, 50, maybe 100 terms total.
yeah. Okay. So if you come across the word in the regulations that you want to dig into, you go back to the definitions, and if it's, for instance, a signed term, you get something like that, and then you get another step, if you will. But it gets you there.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I can see the problem that you articulate about having terms showing up all over the place.
Okay, but at the same
Well,
time,
I don't want to get into this, but but you also said it was a pretty easily maintained document, and as long as the hyperlinks were all internal to the document itself, it was not going to be a problem. So there might be an initial effort put forth, but I think it's a big gain. Now, if you're
Correct.
saying, well, there's a difference between, yeah, a document can withstand 100 hyperlinks, but not 1,000, then that's something different. But that's not what I heard you say.
I don't have concerns over the ability of a PDF to continue to function, even if it's loaded with 1,000 hyperlinks. I think both Microsoft Word and the PDF, which is how we output it and how you use it, are capable of managing that. My only concern is spending, 20 or so hours of our resources on identifying, linking 1,000 terms if we don't have a way to automate that. So I'll check with our graphic design staff and see if there's a way that we could automate that. If it requires us to comb through the document and 1,000 times, highlight a word, create a hyperlink, make sure that it works properly, it's linking to the right thing, then we're creating much more work than I had originally anticipated. So that's my only reservation.
So I have an update regarding our last discussion on new construction.
Okay.
And this is courtesy of Rick Newton, who's out there in the chat function. He noticed that it's the effective date of the town's floodplain regulations, and it's listed in our definition of manufactured home park on page 1-21. So it was some sort of reference to our early floodplain regulations.
Okay. Yet that term is used throughout the regulations in reference to different things. So
Right.
yeah. Okay.
So I don't know whether it needs to be in there referencing flood hazard
Okay.
terms anymore. That's something we'll have to look into.
All right.
What was the point of it? Do we know? I mean, why was it important for floodplain construction?
There were probably rules back then that said for new construction has to meet certain flood hazard standards, and it just defined what new construction is.
Yeah, okay, but now that's pretty detailed set of requirements and floodplains, right?
Yeah. Right. And there's still a need for that definition, whether there needs to be two separate things, one related to flood hazard regulations with this old date and some sort of other definition about just in general what new construction is. There might need to be that.
Okay, so we won't take any more time on that this evening. It just means we have a little homework to do to parse that out. So I'll work with Keith on that. I think we now have the information we needed to make sense of this. So thank you. Okay, well, let's keep things moving. Community residents, we added this definition of community residents. For those of you that do or do not know, the state basically allows a community residence to occur anywhere a single family residential development is allowed by the same permit type. And this is the state's definition, which is why we included it. Does anyone have any questions on that?
Wow. So
Also known as a group home.
yeah. And now we do not allow group homes, am I correct? with one glaring
We-
exception.
We do.
We do?
Yeah, I mean, it is a state law that you basically have to allow them in a residential zone.
Okay, but I don't think our current regulations allow it. And
You don't specifically identify it
Yeah.
as an allowable use. It's allowed by default, by wherever you allow single-family residential. It's basically how it works.
interesting.
Yeah, I think our regulations are just sort of silent on it.
Yeah.
Well, if it's a state statute, it seems like using the state definition makes sense.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah,
That,
keep
that much we
consistent.
can do with it. Yeah.
Okay. All right, good. This is a very important discussion. I would benefit from some clarity on this. Excavation. I've got a few slides to this effect because this also involves filling and land filling. I find this issue is tangled up in most communities I work with. Excavation is often represents two things. It represents the construction process, the process by which a subdivision is built or any other type of development. However, the same set of regulations is often used, the same set of standards is used to regulate an earth removal operation, which is a sand and gravel pit, a quarry, which is really the primary use is to extract soil, process it, sell it, and there is no other end use in sight. So those are two very different things, and they often get very confused with one another because they're this same set of standards and performance standards that are applied to both. So I'm interested in hearing from you folks as to what your understanding is of the excavation operations as they are termed in your zoning. And how that might differ from the way you allow excavation for, say, a subdivision.
Yeah, regulations are pretty confusing when you try to follow them. We have that section 6.6.7 called excavation and filling.
Correct.
That sort of covers a little bit of everything. And that's the regulation that says if you do a certain amount of excavation and filling, a certain significant amount, then you need a special use permit. And it is sort of geared towards like, excavation operation, like a quarry.
Mm-hmm.
But it does go on to say, well, things that are exempt are developments that have been approved by the commission, except in the coastal area management overlay district, and except for some other things. So the definitions are sort of equally as confusing. Where, yeah, like you said, it talks about excavation and filling just in the small sense, like any sort of earth moving, or in the big
Right.
sense of a big operation. And some of the definitions are more for the big things, like landfill and filling operations. Seems to be getting at that. But in general, it's like it's not just the definitions. If that whole section 6.6.7 needs to be kind of reworded also.
I think what we need to do is we need to separate out the construction process for a project from a sand and gravel pit operation.
Yeah.
Commercial versus construction.
Right, because one isn't really the use. It's just the construction process. It's like getting a building permit, framing and foundation pouring and roofing. It is an activity occurring on the site that is the process leading to the final use, the project itself.
For new
It's not the
construction.
use. right? So we need to separate out excavation and filling is just the construction process. And yes, it does, like building construction requires a building permit. It does, if a certain threshold is passed, it does require its own special use permit or site plan, whatever it may be. So there are its own permit requirements associated with that. But the issue is it's listed in your use tables as if it were a use in and of itself. You know, excavation is identified, the permit requirement is identified in all districts. And therefore, it's easy enough to confuse that with the right to, as long as you have a special use permit, to run an earth removal operation anywhere in town. So I think it's really important that we separate out sand and gravel pits, which are currently apparently allowed in the RR 80 and RA 40, from excavation as a process to build something.
Yeah, and when you look at our use chart, excavation and filling
Yes.
is allowed by special permit in every zone. So
Right.
you might be able to have a gravel pit in every zone in town.
And that's exactly what concerns me, because I think what's being confused here is that permit. Yes, you are allowed to get a permit for excavation to build a subdivision or a single family house or a church, whatever it may be. But that permit for that excavation is not a permit for a sand and gravel operation. So we need to untether the two.
Our regulations sort of cast a wide net and say basically everything with a lot of grading is basically a sand and gravel operation unless it's not. So
Well,
it is hard to.
will we allow sand and gravel operations in residential zones? That's really kind of surprising.
Currently allowed in the RR 80 and RA 40.
Yeah. We need to look at what we really want to do there, I think.
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
the distinction between a normal construction activity and a
Commercial operation.
quarry certainly needs to be made, but then we also need to make a distinction about where we really want to allow a quarry.
Agreed.
Right.
Yes.
And it makes sense to have some sort of extra permitting for some development that does have a ton of earthwork. Because
Right.
single family houses don't have to go to the commission normally, but let's say someone's carving out a giant hillside to build a mansion, that has a lot more impact.
Right.
So, we might want to look at thresholds like that, where no matter what you're doing, if you're doing a certain amount, that it triggers some other sort of review here.
For that.
Okay.
Subdivisions over a certain size, something like that too.
Yeah. Square yards.
Okay. And so my reference here to the RR 80 and RA 40, and I pulled up that page of your regulations, and it's section 3.2.3.7, which states excavation operations, not just excavation, but excavation operations, which suggest that it's some sort of enterprise, right? It's not just the process of building something. So I understand from you that you all think this is very confusing too, and it really needs to be untethered. So we'll get to work on doing that. I've done this a couple times before, and it's a very common issue. So we'll start to separate those out. I think you likely have all of the language and regulations in place already to regulate excavation adequately, so that if someone is doing a lot of earthwork, you have all the standards in place. I think it's just a matter of pulling out a sand and gravel pit from what you have, so it's not, the two aren't confused.
But is this, excuse me, is this a phase two
No,
proposition?
I think we should do it now because uh, I'm really not looking to change what's allowed. This requires some further investigation. So maybe we can't, I can't answer that right now.
Okay.
But I think it's possible to separate the two without changing what's currently allowed, without changing the intent of your regulations, even though they are somewhat confusing and they could be interpreted in different ways right now. We need to drive down to the intent. And I think we can expose that, separate the two. And if we're in agreement that we're not changing what's allowed, that we're just clarifying things, then we want to do that now. However, if it becomes apparent to us that you're currently allowing an excavation operation as it clearly worded in the RR 80 and RA 40, and we don't think that's appropriate, and that's something you want to pull back, or you may just want to limit it to an industrial district. And that's definitely something we would tackle. We would note it now and tackle it in the next phase.
Okay, that was where I was going.
Fair enough.
All right, so that applies to landfill and filling. So here we have landfill and filling operations, and this is your definition. And filling is, along with excavation, which to me is all part of the same process. Well, excavation admittedly is extraction and filling is the opposite. It is another use that's identified as a permitted use in districts by special permit. So we have a real good definition here, but what we're lacking is an understanding as to, are we talking about a construction process or are we talking about an enterprise?
What sort of an enterprise would be a filling operation?
Oh, a landfill. Yeah, you're receiving fill. People are looking to get rid of asphalt and concrete and clay, and they need a place to dump their truck and unload it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, literally a soil or an earthen materials landfill.
Okay.
Yeah.
A bulky waste landfill.
Got it.
Or a bulky waste landfill would include, may include other items as well, wood debris, building, construction materials.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. The next that is a little confused, and I'm hoping to get some direction on this as well, is references to agriculture versus a farm. And you have definitions of both. You have the farm defined as at least 5 acres, and then agriculture with its own definition. Agriculture is the use that is identified as the permitted use in districts, yet you have this separate definition of farm. And I was hoping you could explain that to me a little bit.
I believe that 5-acre definition is falling out of favor due to the increasing popularity of smaller farms.
Right.
That was an issue I ran into quite a bit on an ag commission up in Sterling, Connecticut. Is there are many farms, my own included at the time, that are less than 5 acres, and not being able to be considered a farm is problematic. I think the way around it is to use definitions that refer to income from farming activities as a threshold. So the USDA uses a $5,000 gross income as their trigger for you are a farm. If you're making $5,000 per year from agricultural activities, you're a farm, and you can apply for all sorts of federal grants and that sort of thing. I think that's a much more fluid approach that is a lot more copacetic with the small farm movement.
Yeah, as long as there's some sort of trigger. Because I was going to say, like, if it weren't for the definition of farm and the 5-acre thing, being a farm has certain benefits as far as our regulations go, where you can have an unlimited amount of animals, for example, and might, the regulations might let you do certain things if you're a farm versus if you're just a house that happens to grow some vegetables in the backyard and sell them once in a while, just to have that standard. So, yeah, if it's income, then at least there's something to differentiate what's a farm.
So I do have a question about that, Keith, because as I mentioned, we have this definition of farm, but if you go through the districts, the use that's permitted is called agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we have this separate definition of agriculture. However, there are some required setbacks for things like manure storage and stables, et cetera. But there are no minimum lot size references to agriculture as an allowed use. So how is the definition of farm enforced upon that if the use that's allowed is technically agriculture?
Right.
Well,
If you include aquaculture in agriculture, 5 acres wouldn't be much for aquaculture.
Right.
well, but it's land, and aquaculture doesn't suggest land anyway. So we've
We're going
got
to keep a separate definition for aquaculture, I guess.
Yeah, we've got that confusion elsewhere. So the cure would seem to be to drop farm, and within the definition of agriculture, to put whatever limits, whether it's a financial limit or a acreage limit or something like that, within the definition of agriculture. So then your use encompasses your use definition encompasses the parameters, the size, the significance of it that you want.
Yeah, so in other words, don't use farm,
So-
say agricultural use. And hopefully there's some threshold as to what makes you an actual agricultural use versus
Exactly.
a house with some
Yeah,
vegetables.
let's
Exactly.
talk about that
But
because
yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm just thinking out loud here. So first off, isn't there some kind of a tax break associated with your property if you've termed it agriculture use?
Yes.
PA 490, Public Act 490 does allow for certain qualifying agricultural uses to qualify for a property tax break, correct? You're taxed at a lower rate, correct?
Right. So we might want to look into that to make sure we're in alignment and, we don't have everything, that we're in alignment. And also, livestock, I thought that you had to have a certain number of acres for, as an example, for keeping large livestock, horses, cattle, etc. And I always thought that's where the farm definition really kind of, was brought in play when it comes to keeping livestock.
Yeah, you have to have,
you want to be careful there. You don't want somebody to have a pig or a horse on a 1/4 acre lot.
so you do fortunately have some protections in place with respect to that. It's a minimum of 240,000 square feet, which is required, which is something like 6 acres, 5.5, something like that. So you do have that limit for keeping and breeding of livestock. And at least it's identified in a couple of the residential zones.
Right, so don't we have to incorporate that somehow here?
We are currently treating keeping and breeding, and this is part of a larger discussion. We're treating keeping and breeding of livestock as a separate use. It's separated out currently from agriculture to
So
distinguish
then
it
would you
from-
get rid of livestock and poultry in the definition of agriculture? Would you take those last, so it would read, but not limited to nurseries, horticulture, forestry?
Yeah.
And livestock and poultry go away because it's requires a different reg?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So how do we handle it? And yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
you
I don't
point to
know.
one potential solution is just separate out the livestock operation from the farming and let's pull this apart. I guess my question for you all is what is allowed in terms, if I wanted, let's set aside the livestock issue because you have a very clear requirement on that at the 240,000 square feet. That's specifically identified. But if I want to do agriculture, basic farming, like, farm field corn, the whole process, and I had a 4-acre lot, and I'm in one of the districts where agriculture is allowed, can I do that? Or are you going to, do you currently point to that farm definition and say, no, actually, what you're talking about is a farm, and you have to be 5 acres? How does that work?
Keith, do we have a right to farm ordinance in this town?
I don't think that we do.
Okay.
Seems to me
Regarding
that
the zoning
5 acres is a
question,
little
I'm not
arbitrary.
really sure, which is sort of, oh, go ahead. Well, regarding the zoning question, I'm not really sure, which is sort of the scary thing with our regulations here. Do you need to be a 5-acre farm or can you do agricultural uses on 4 acres? And that's a basic question that just isn't really spelled out.
I think that, limiting the size or that 5 acre threshold poses a lot of problems for small farms. But I do see the merit in having some control over which agricultural uses can be happening in the different zones in town. Maybe we want to be more specific about the agricultural uses allowed in the different zones because our 80 has a lot more open space, obviously, and different uses would be more appropriate there than in the 20. So maybe we want to address agriculture district by district, which would have big impacts on how we want to define a farm also.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask a really kind of naive question here. What other regulations are attached to agriculture and farming? So, in other words, is it buffers? Is it, I don't know, the use of equipment? Is it what else? What tangents come off of these two definitions?
With zoning, not many additional restrictions are put on.
Okay, but how about leeway?
There's probably more leeway than restrictions in that you basically get to have.
Correct.
Zoning doesn't really get into how many animals a farm would have, but it does for
Right.
a regular house. So
Right, and I'm just thinking, I mean, I'm all for small farming. I think it's the way to go, but I'm just trying to kind of, tweeze out why these are even here in a way. So, is it Is it odor? Is it the
Mhm.
equipment associated with farming, and so therefore, you don't want a 100-year-old tractor sitting in somebody's yard? Is it noise? I'm just trying to, is it where are the tangents that come off of these two definitions? That's what I'm trying to.
Yeah, Lynn, I think you have it pinned down pretty well. It's most of those nuisance issues. Odor is the most obvious one, I think, but it can be, barn structures that are unsightly and equipment and things that tend to pile up on a farm. I think
Yeah.
it's a lot of those nuisance issues that are the concern. And right now, Keith's right. Your regulations are very permissive. One of the only restrictions there are is the 200-foot setback for manure storage and stables, in addition to the minimum lot area for livestock.
Okay.
Yeah, and our regulations are very silent on agricultural uses in general. Sometimes farmers will ask, well, can I do this activity and that activity? And we don't really have good guidance.
Yeah.
The way I picture it is in 1961, when these were written, people thought of farms more as these sort of historic things that hopefully would go on, but not necessarily that people would create new agricultural uses in farms. So this,
Mhm.
where when that happens now, it's sort of, there's not much guidance there.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. I'm. Again, I was just trying to come up with the rationale for any of these, and really, other than livestock and poultry, which again we've already talked about, maybe a larger area is mandated for that in our regs already. I don't see any issues here.
I do think that the 5-acre requirement in the farm definition is problematic because it's confusing as to whether or not that's is applicable to agriculture. There are lots of farm references in your regulations. A lot of them are to signs and that sort of thing. So we need a definition of farm that allows all those references to continue to work and be relevant. But we need to be very careful about regulating within the definitions for something that it's not clear whether or not it's applicable or enforceable to agriculture.
Okay, so there's a
5 acres
great
to me seems
example,
arbitrary.
Francisco. We don't, just because somebody has a garden and they're selling tomatoes, are they allowed then to have a sign on their property? I'm not quite sure. You could have a sign every other yard, So that's what I was trying to get at. Where is there a benefit or some kind of a related regulation associated with the word or the definition of farm
There is
Again,
in our reg?
I would
Right,
propose that the financial trigger would make a lot of sense and solve that problem, because people who are selling a few tomatoes out of their garden are not going to meet the USDA's definition of a farm.
Oh, and they're probably not
Right,
gonna want to
but
pay
who's
taxes.
gonna, whenever we start triggering, whenever we start with financials, income, then there's a monitoring involved in that. And who's monitoring it? And that changes season to season, year to year, et cetera, et cetera. So, which then gets into a permitting thing. And again,
Right.
who's monitoring that?
And my concern gets into this commission's authority to require a property owner or applicant to provide financial information. And I'm not certain that you have that authority.
Or want it, even.
Yeah, at a minimum,
Yeah.
it it's definitely more difficult to enforce than just looking to see if something's 5 acres. But I see the point about 5 acres being too big for some of the smaller farms.
And then the question about the farm reference, how that used, and we can cover this ground when we, at a later meeting when we talk about signs, because we have a lot of work to do in that area. The most common reference to farm is related to signs. It's certain farm signs that are allowed, seasonal farm signs are allowed, and those references are all to farm. They're not to agriculture. So we need a definition of farm that allows for all of those references to remain operable. But we need to remove this ambiguity between what is a farm and what is agriculture. So
I'm looking at a definition from the town of Lebanon, Connecticut, which has been a leader on this sort of issue. They define farm as just an area devoted to farm uses for I don't know why they can use that word in its own definition, but
Yeah, that's
yeah,
area,
that's a bad practice.
yeah, let's say an area devoted to agricultural uses
Yeah.
for grain or the expectation of gain in the raising of agricultural products, livestock, poultry, or the production of dairy products. So they don't mention size or income.
Do they limit where a farm can be?
Now that I don't know. I've only just opened their definitions page.
Okay, because I think that's great, but you'd have to then say you can't have a farm in an RA20 zone.
Right.
Have it in an RR80 zone or something like that. So
I think the part where they say an area devoted does have some sway there, though, because if it's your yard, you can't really say it's devoted to farm uses. I don't know if I'm picking straws apart here, but
Mhm.
I do like the general permissiveness of it.
Okay, I think what I need to do is work with Keith to come back to you with a recommended approach on this. I think we're hearing from you that, right, you don't want to be too restrictive, but at the same time, we need to be careful to protect properties from nuisances. So we have that balance. And in this phase of the work, what we're really trying to do is bring clarity to this and not introduce, not open things up or introduce a new restriction. We're not trying to change what's allowed. We're rather just trying to bring clarity.
Yep.
So that's the way I'm going to approach it. And so we'll come back to you with our ideas on how to handle this.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks.
And then just to kind of blow through this really quick, the Connecticut Department of Agriculture has a definition of farm. So it's something to consider referencing that definition. And they also have a separate definition of agriculture, which is a little different than farm. So we'll take a closer look at both of those.
Okay.
All right. Aquaculture is something we talked about, I believe, at our last meeting, and the need to make sure that was representative of sea kelp farming. And I think I mentioned that we have a staff member, one of our environmental scientists that lives down on the shore and has friends in this industry and has been involved with them. And they actually operate a farm in Stonington or
Yep.
in the waters off the shore of Stonington. And so he recommended adding this specific language in red to your definition or to the definition of aquaculture, to also include the farming of sea vegetables, for instance, sugar kelp in waters of the state.
Makes sense to me.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, good. That was easy enough. All right. So I'm still on agriculture. Processing of agricultural products is identified as a separate use, separate from agriculture. And the reason being is because it doesn't necessarily have to happen on site. It can happen somewhere else. And it is currently allowed in the districts at top, the LS5, GC60, TC80, HM by special permit, and in your manufacturing district and Heritage Mill District by zoning permit. However, we lack a definition of what that is. And it's important to define that. And so I've proposed a definition here. Let me know what you think.
Looks good.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah, agreed. I think it makes sense.
Yep, sounds good.
Very good. Thank you. Let me note that is good.
You should note it as the quickest good you're ever going to get.
You gotta give him an easy one once in a while, Lynn, so that he stays interested in his project.
I know.
Yeah, thank you. I try to mix them in evenly. Packing, help me out here. What is packing? Packing, multiple references. It's most often grouped with assembly, fabricating, compounding, warehousing, but it's really spread around in the HM. For instance, it's grouped with warehousing alone. Packing to me means putting things in boxes, but we don't have a definition of this clearly. And there are multiple references. So if it's anything other than putting things in containers and boxes, let me know.
Packaging perhaps would be a better term anyway.
Yeah, is that what it is? Is it packaging?
That's
what
how
I mean.
I've looked at it.
But it still needs a definition.
Right.
Putting things in boxes.
Putting things in boxes works for me.
Meat packing, I think, is the only term that I really recognize as a fairly well-used term that has packing in it. That being said, I know the meat packing district in Manhattan. I gotta be honest with you, I don't know exactly what meat packing involves. I always imagine it was sausage making. I don't know.
I think it was exactly that, from
Yeah.
butchering to the market.
Yeah, westerly
Okay.
packing, I'm thinking that kind of stuff, westerly meat packing.
Okay, all right.
But why couldn't packing also be putting something on a pallet, shrink wrapping it? I mean, when you say putting in boxes,
Yeah.
that doesn't quite work.
No, that would be packing to me.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So just saying putting it in a box, I'd say making something suitable for
Palletizing,
transportation.
For shipping.
palletizing,
Suitable for
making
shipping.
suitable for transportation.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's sort of general term that could apply to different industries and different products.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
And this is
Okay,
not
so
from
let me
a
just ask
lack
you
of
this.
looking either.
Let me
Yeah.
just ask you this real quick. So, do you consider what UPS does as packaging?
For delivery.
Distribution, delivery, something like that.
Well, you drop things off and they put them in a box and then they mail it out.
I think they're more commonly called a distribution center.
Right.
Okay, so is that part of what this is supposed to encompass? Distributing?
I mean, in my
Or-
mind, packing or packaging is more, I don't know, something a manufacturer or a,
Yeah, to me, it's preparing something to be distributed, but not the act of distributing, if that makes any sense.
Okay. I just want to be sure. So we've covered distribution
Yeah.
in something else. You don't need to add it here.
and I don't know that
Because
we
you're-
do cover
because-
distribution somewhere
Yeah.
else, but it
Mhm.
seems a little different.
Okay. Okay.
Well,
The other approach to this is we just get rid of these references to packing as an identified use, as if it's its own operation, and assuming that it's always associated with some other type of operation. It's part of a manufacturing process. It's maybe the last step where you're sending it out. It's part of a distribution process. It's part of a wholesaling or warehousing operation. Does it need to be identified as its own specific use that therefore needs to be defined?
Good question.
Right? Could we just say, could we just assume that it's part of the fabricating and compounding and warehousing process and just be done with it?
That would
Probably.
be the easy way. I'm just worried we're missing something, but that would
Yeah,
be the easiest way.
To my mind, it's the final step of all those things, getting ready to put it on the, for UPS to pick it up and take it away. I mean, it is part of the process, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know if
Yeah.
some businesses do this at a separate location, where they will have their packaging center away from their manufacturing.
Wouldn't they have to pack it to get it
But
there?
isn't
Exactly.
packaging and distribution part of warehousing? Warehousing being the storage and distribution.
You would think so.
I mean,
Like you
if
wouldn't go to
you're
a
warehousing something, it's got to go out.
yeah. You would think so. Like we wouldn't go into a warehouse and say, "Hey, wait a minute, you're doing some packaging there. You're doing something wrong."
Right. To me, it's warehousing comprises storage and distribution. I don't know. That's just me.
Well, then maybe it does make sense to just remove packing as a separate call out for simplicity's sake.
Okay. And it was from no lack of looking on my part to try to find some sort of industry standard for this, like a packing company. And, every reference I got was sending me all over the place to moving company, to, right, there isn't like a packing industry per se that has its own standards and definitions that I just don't expect that you're going to have a packing company come in and say, I want to open up a packing operation.
Yeah, it's really an accessory to whatever
It's part of these other operations. It's kind of a process of one of these other operations in my mind.
It's the final process. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll take a look at this. Can just be a lot cleaner if we get rid of it and just get rid of any confusion caused by it.
Okay.
All right. Live entertainment. And this kind of comment came directly from Keith. This is your existing definition of live entertainment. And he asked, is it logical to say that any dancing equals live entertainment, as your definition currently does? And should we, if so, I mean, should we be regulating dance floors and dancing establishments separately from live entertainment? Is it the same thing?
We have lots of live entertainment without dancing. I'm thinking of the Minute Mystic, and they don't have a dance floor, but they have a bar and a restaurant and that sort of thing.
I feel like there should be a distinction between dancing by patrons and dancing by a performer. I mean, you can't say anywhere dancing breaks out that's live entertainment. I feel like that's counterintuitive to the normal understanding of what live entertainment would be.
Yeah.
The place you can go dancing is pretty rare these days, right?
That's true.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you're right, though. It doesn't make sense to call dancing live entertainment.
My guess is that, it's the loud music that would accompany the dancing might have been the issue. And we have this other section about amplified live entertainment that says you need a acoustical study, and it's really only for restaurants or liquor sale places, and that has a rule about a dance floor can't exceed 5% of the gross floor area of the structure. But that's I don't know whether that would apply to someone who comes in and says, I want to be a nightclub, which the dance floor is usually bigger. But yeah, it just seemed a little strange that dancing was, people dancing is considered live entertainment.
Yeah, that is odd.
Is there any place in town, save for an establishment that hosts weddings where you, of course, have dancing? Is there any place in town that offers dancing like any given night of the week?
Yes.
I don't know. I mean, there's places like the Phoenix, which have live bands there, and there might be dancing when they do that.
Okay.
I don't know if there's
Oh,
any
but there are key. There's like gosh, the Seaport does it in one of their buildings. Where you go and dance. I forget what it's called, but it's like a group that goes there and it's open to the public. You pay to go.
Does the town have any dance clubs?
Well, it definitely has the dance studios.
Yeah.
Right, which is, that's an educational venue, right, or studio, correct. So I see the importance of extracting patron or guest dancing from this definition of live entertainment, because that doesn't qualify it as being live entertainment. I think when we do that, for the sake of cleaning up this definition, I think it's important to consider any impacts that we might have on dancing that's currently allowed. So the question is dancing something the town is interested in regulating in any way in the zoning regulations, other than all the noise and things like that?
I tend to think not.
I should think so. Yeah.
We have bigger issues.
So we could afford to just pull out any form of dancing by patrons and guests, and we're not going to upset the apple cart here, right?
Agree.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the only risk is that in our section 6616 that has all these different rules about amplified live entertainment, in which there are a lot of rules there,
Yeah.
that if dancing is the live entertainment, then we wouldn't be able to hold them to these things, I guess.
Dancing on
Performers.
its own doesn't generate lots of noise. I mean,
No,
we're
it's just
really-
the music.
we're interested in the nuisance factor. So
Yeah.
it's the music.
So I think, Keith, you said it right there. You said it's just the music. And so I think when the music is being played, the music would qualify as live entertainment, amplified.
I guess it's not live if it's just piped in music, disco style.
Okay, all right. So I think what we need is for your noise standards to also apply to amplified music, right?
Yes.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, so that one little section can just say amplified live entertainment or amplified
And
music.
and amplified
Recorded music.
music. Yeah, okay. And then that addresses the issue.
That covers it. Yes.
Okay.
Dancing or no dancing.
Right.
So it's going to say,
Okay.
just so that I'm following this, it's going to say amplified music or live entertainment, music, comma, a musical, theatrical, dance, cabaret, or comedy act. Because taped music is not an act. I just want to make sure it's not musical. A musical. So just the language there, it's two separate things.
Right, correct. Yeah, two separate things. So live entertainment would be its own thing. We're not gonna we're gonna pull out the dancing part of it, but we'll keep it as it is. And then we'll have this separate, and maybe it requires a definition of exactly what amplified music is. We'll have this separate type of use that is amplified music, for which the regulations you have in place that for noise and all those other issues are applicable to.
Okay.
Pre-recorded or live.
So we just because dancing isn't really the problem here. It's
No.
the noise coming from
No,
the music
yeah,
that,
dancing can
that
come
gets
out. Yeah.
people dancing, right?
Correct.
Yep. I thought
Okay.
I thought Keith, you had suggested combining the two when you said amplified. We'll have
Yeah.
amplified and live entertainment. Okay, thank you.
Well, I did suggest combining the two, but elsewhere in the regulations where all
Right.
these different rules are, in section
Right.
16.
Yeah, not within this definition itself. Correct.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Good. I think we're all on the same page. Let's keep going. Here's another complicated one. Maybe it's not. Trailer parks and campgrounds. What is a trailer park? There is no definition. I feel certain I know what a trailer park is, but help me out here. There is a reference to trailer parks in your regs, and there's the section number right there, 6613.7. And it says storm drainage facilities shall comply with the standards for the trailer and trailer park regulations of the town of Stonington. Where might we find those regulations? Do they exist?
From what I understand, those trailer park regulations pre-existed zoning, and I believe they were written into the zoning regulations in the 60s. So I think it became our recreational camp regulations in here, even though those are more RV parks and not
You could
trailer
fix
parks.
that by saying one or more camp trailers or recreational vehicles and just get rid of the trailer park business.
Do you allow trailer parks?
I don't think so.
Mobile home park, you buy or rent a piece of land or the mobile home itself, and you have a year-round structure. Is that allowed?
Yeah, we have one right on the Mystic River.
Yeah, right
Yep.
off around 26.
Pre-existing, I don't know that we did allow a new one.
That's the thing. I think that we have a few in town,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't seem like we allow new ones. We allow these recreational camps, which are more seasonal campgrounds.
The problem is the exact language for the RR80 and RA40 allowed by special permit. The exact language is trailer parks and campgrounds.
Yeah.
And I get the campground, you have a recreational camp definition. So I get that's definitely seasonal, and that's your RV, and you drive it in, you drive it away. I understand what that is. But you say trailer parks, and to me, that's a neighborhood of year-round mobile homes.
I think there should be a definition for a trailer park. With people not being able to afford houses, maybe people are going to be starting to buy trailers and living in them year round. If I had 10 acres, it might be something to consider. So I think a trailer park would be worthy of its separate definition.
Yeah. And it needs a whole set of regulations if we do that. Like, can someone have 100 or 10?
And septic and the whole runoff, everything folds under it.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a real challenge here, is these regulations that are referenced don't exist.
So let's create one, I guess, for that one.
So I
So-
think this is a phase 2
Yes.
Yeah.
project.
Yeah.
I think in this phase, what we need to do is to pull out the trailer park reference and just allow for the recreational camp, which I think we all agreed is definitely allowed, and you do have a little bit of regulation to guide that, not much to go by, but a little bit. Is that a safe thing to do, to just take the word trailer park out of this in this phase and then come back to it?
Since we don't
think
have
so.
any regulations, the answer's got to be yes.
Yeah.
Yes, agreed.
But when we do come back to it, I think we ought to be talking about mobile home
Yeah.
as opposed to trailer parks. I mean, I've been a long time since I've seen one you could hook to the back to your
Right. Right.
pickup and haul away.
We need to use more modern language. And then we also should have a conversation about modular homes, because now we have something that's a little in between.
Hmm.
Oh.
And
Well, a couple things here. So first off, you've got the tiny homes, which, Fred, you can just put on a trailer and move from spot to spot. So those need to be considered in the discussion.
Mhm.
And also, if we're going to remove the thought of trailer parks in this recreational camp definition, we
Mhm.
need to say something about temporary
seasonal,
Yeah.
right, or time limit. Yep.
Temporary, yep.
Temporary.
time limit,
Right.
something like that. Yep.
Agreed.
Yes.
That's the point I was going to make. Good point, Lynn. Yep.
And we do have a definition of manufactured home, but it still doesn't get into whether you can have a trailer park, where you can do it, anything
Right.
like
But
that.
in the recreational camp, we need to have a time limit, some sort of timing.
Yeah, that is in there already. There's another section of all these rules about that.
Right.
Okay.
Man.
Moving right along.
Okay, very good. Okay, we got through the definitions. Now on to Mackenzie conflicts, and I think we'll be able to pick up the pace here, because I've come to you with what I think we should do, and I just need you to agree with me.
Whatever
right.
you want to do, Francisco.
Got my arm feels twisted.
So we'll walk through them one by one. This is the same list I introduced you to last month, and we talked through that in quite a bit. So I'm hoping you kind of remember that discussion to some degree. So the exact language here in this section currently is that the commission may reduce. And what we talked about here, for those that may not have made our meeting last month, is that case law suggests that your regulations should not include language that gives your commission, you as a body, discretion, just this wide discretion without any parameters or metrics or rationale behind that discretion. There really needs to be some firm guardrails on why you allow things and why you don't allow things. And ideally, that's specifically codified in the regulations, just to completely remove the discretion from the equation, which isn't to say your regulations can't permit for some degree of flexibility. We just have to anticipate why it might need to provide that flexibility, and we need to explain it within the regulations. So when you're in the position of acting in your function administratively as a commission, it should really be very black and white. It should be very binary, yes or no. And all this gray about how we should handle things should be done in this forum, us and you acting in your legislative capacity, in your rule writing, rule making capacity. So that's why we need to clean up the language here. And the first example, it involves reduced landscaping standards. And right now, as it's written, it says the commission may reduce the landscaping buffer yard requirement by not more than 25% for excellence in building or space design. Trouble is, whose definition of excellence? And
How's that defined? Yeah.
so, but let's just get rid of this.
Agreed.
I would agree too, but the question is, do we do it now or do we do it in phase 2?
I think we should do it now because this is a real vulnerability you have in your regulations.
Yeah.
And we want to address anything that's not consistent with either statute, case law, or case law. And while this is, maybe changing what's allowed in that we're 25% less flexible, there are some other ways that we can address this. So let's get through all these, and I'll show you how we can address some of this without completely removing what may be considered as a right.
Okay.
So in this case, because I think it's just near impossible or very, very difficult to define what excellence in building space design is, I think our best approach is just to get rid of this. I think it's just too problematic. That's not the approach for everything, however.
Yeah. No, I don't disagree. I was just with getting rid of it. I was just questioning whether getting rid of it in phase 1 was appropriate.
Ultimately, that's your call. I don't see it as being too problematic. When I tend to think about the changes that we're making now, are they defensible in terms of us making the decisions, bringing a revised sets of regulations to a public hearing without a lot of community engagement in the decision making? And are these decisions defensible? And in this case, I think it's pretty defensible. I'm not sure who's going to get really upset about us plugging this hole.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think part of the whole phase 1 idea was to make the regulations more
Clear.
things that are, illegal. And, these sort of Mackenzie conflicts here are in that category. And most of them don't have big implications.
Okay.
I'm confused, Francisco. What's the difference between enhance and excellence in the one, your slide right now?
Well, here we're using more words. So let me walk you through it. So what you allow right now I think the language is very problematic because it says at the commission's discretion.
Right.
So just at your whim, you've just decided that you want to allow this or not allow it. And that's very problematic. So what I proposed is that in this case, it's about allowing detention ponds in the front yard. That we instead say retention and detention ponds are permitted in side and rear yards, right? We state the obvious. Ponds are permitted in front yards only if side and rear yards are demonstrated to be unsuitable for location of a pond, and the pond is designed to enhance the appearance of the property. So it's multi-factor. First of all, it puts an onus on the applicant to make a demonstration that the side and rear yard is unsuitable because of bedrock outcrops, maybe the best view of the property is from the side or rear yard. Maybe that's the most impactful to adjacent property owners. It puts it on the applicant to prove it to you rather than about you just using your broad discretion. And yes, there's some subjectivity in enhance the appearance of the property, but I think we can all come to agreement as to enhance. It's the idea is it makes it look nicer versus the definition of excellence, which I think it's really harder to pinpoint what excellence is.
That's fine. That's fine.
So I would suggest, I'm all in favor for completely eliminating the last one. And this one, I'm in favor of eliminating that it may be allowed. We just say that detention ponds are permitted inside and rear yards, period. And there is no discretion.
And
I mean,
that's
you don't
that's the other
have
approach.
to
Yep.
enhance the property.
That was another.
I don't know if I agree with that. There may be cases where, just the forces of gravity don't permit you to put a detention basin in the backyard, and
Okay.
But that's not enhancing the appearance of the property. So just because the forces of gravity say, you can't put a detention pond, well, maybe that property, that's not the use for the property.
I would just strike the last phrase, so you're not talking about
Yeah.
enhancing the appearance. If you need a retention pond and you can't put it in the side or rear yard,
Mhm.
but this business about enhancing the appearance, I mean, they're not
That's discretion.
designed to enhance anything. They're designed to keep the water from washing out your driveway or whatever.
There's another possibility, which is just to erase the whole section there. Now we do have the Architectural Design Review Board. who
I
looks
like
at-
that better than.
They look at the whole site. They look at the landscaping. There's a landscape
just
architect
get rid
on
of it.
there.
Mhm.
So if something is in the front yard, they do help make it more attractive.
I would not rely on the Architectural Review Commission. I think we ought to have a say in some of this stuff. Myself,
I'm okay with the red letters now, the red lettering.
I agree. That statement's pretty clear. I think that's workable.
Is that all right
think
with you?
I think it's
Yes.
clear that the preference is definitely the side and rear yards, which was the purpose of this whole section. So by retaining it, it allows you to direct those facilities to side or rear yards, but doesn't restrict it to side or rear yards.
All right with this?
So
Chuck?
let me just say this. Okay, so I'm going to go through something because I know this is going to come up. To Chuck's point, it's going to cost a lot of money to put it in the front, in the rear yard. You'd have to, I don't know, excavate, do something. So I want to put it in the front yard. Well, costing a lot of money is not supposed to be part of the equation for us to make a decision on, that it's an increased building or excavation cost for the owner. So I know that is going to be the arguments brought forth. And
Okay,
is that
but-
going to be acceptable because it fits into the definition now?
Sometimes cost does go
So
hand
if you
in
were
hand.
on the ZBA, you would say absolutely not. That is not an acceptable rationale.
Right. And we're not,
I
we're not
think
going
that-
by ZBA
I
hardship
think
standards.
practicality comes into play, more than cost, and I just think that ruling out the front yard in cases where, from a practical standpoint, maybe it can be done aesthetically. Maybe somebody has an extraordinarily large front yard. Just ruling it out is arbitrary, and I don't think we should be arbitrary in here. I really don't. So I don't think it has anything to do with cost. Nothing to do with cost.
Can we change the word unsuitable in the last phrase to infeasible? That would kind of rule out the cost thing there. Because
like
if
that.
it's feasible, it doesn't matter how much it costs. It's feasible.
I like that.
Yeah, I think that's a great
word?
idea. Good idea, Nandy. Yeah.
All right.
Is that a word or should it be not feasible?
I am not sure.
I believe
Both
it's a
infeasible,
word.
but maybe just say to be not feasible.
Okay.
I mean,
I
not-
don't
correct.
know, no linguist, but that one That one clanged.
Okay, good.
Terrific.
Let's move on. Off-street parking now. We have a couple of them to this effect. So you require parking to comply with the provisions of section 7.10 unless you modify it based upon technical review. However, we don't really qualify what that review is, who reviews it, to what extent is a technical review suitable. So here's my recommendation. The off-street parking requirements shall comply with the provisions of section 7.10 of these regulations, except as modified below or where a parking assessment, and you do have a definition of what a parking assessment is. It's currently in section 7.10.2.7, and it basically explains that it has to be conducted by an engineer or a qualified professional and has certain parameters around it. Demonstrates parking demand and facility needs that differ from the standards of section 7.10.
I like it.
Good. Think it's good?
It's more clear. Yeah.
So I think what we all acknowledge is that our parking numbers are it's spitballing, right? I mean, to use a technical term. And these uses and developments can be very nuanced depending on where they're located, the time of day operations. Their actual needs can vary considerably. And you, as an authority, have certain parameters that you're recommending, that you're advising. But if an applicant can demonstrate to you that their needs are quite different, you should have sufficient flexibility to allow them to build what's appropriate to the use.
Right.
Yep.
Agreed.
Okay, good.
Do you think though, guys, we've got that parking commission, where I think we've got some representatives on the parking commission, a whole commission or a group that's looking into parking specifically in the downtown Mystic area. Do you think it might be good to just get some input from them?
That group is looking at public parking strategies for the downtown Mystic area, things like parking meters in both towns. And this section here is just about the HI 60 zone on exit 92. And that group isn't really getting into zoning so much.
Okay. It's just on the HI 60 zone?
This specific section here, this 4.9.6.
Okay.
We do have a couple of other related references, so I'll walk you through those one by one. Okay, so we'll move forward with this language. Related to that, access management. And basically, unless waived by the commission as it currently reads, due to access from a road other than a state highway, applicants shall be required to, and then there's a whole set of provisions that follow. The recommendation is basically, unless access is available from a state road, from a state highway. So just commit to that, rather than put you in the position to waive it. Just commit to it, on its face.
I'm good with that.
That makes
I
sense.
like the clarity of it. Yep.
Yeah,
Right.
it's good.
I'm good.
Okay.
I'm good.
Okay. Another example of unless waived in here, we're due to superior design, et cetera, conforming to area plans of the POCD, which are no longer a feature of the POCD. the recommendation is just to eliminate this provision.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Great.
Agree.
Okay. Another, still on the subject of access management. And here, maybe we'll have to kick this around a little bit. So currently, at your discretion, you allow an applicant or you require them to provide a traffic study, improve roadways, close curb cuts, limit turning movements, to do quite a bit, and that's at your discretion, which I don't think is as problematic as some of the other items, but I think you just have to say why. So the commission may, and here's the why. Due to the level of traffic generated, the complexity of traffic operations present, or crash history in the proximity, require the applicant to do all of the following.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, agreed.
I like it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
We never really hold their feet to the fire, though.
This is Route 2.
Yeah.
So this is the highway.
And we do know that the McKenzie conflict issue, the McKenzie issue, the court case, still allows for you to require an applicant to provide additional information, more studies, drawings, whatever it is. So it does still give you full authority, but it's best practice rather than just saying you have broad discretion to request that because you're in the mood to read some more studies, rather to really explain why it is that you would be requesting that those additional improvements or additional information.
Makes sense.
Okay.
I'm good.
Good.
Likewise.
Yep.
Okay, next. The congregate living facilities. You basically have a setback or an offset requirements referred to, so that if you have a real long building, the face of it isn't a long wall, it's broken up with some offsets to that plane. And there's the standards on the right in that table. If you're 100, 150 feet, you need to step it back 10 feet at some point, offset that face of the building. However, you give yourself the authority to waive strict compliance if they once again demonstrate that the design features will make it more compatible. And the question is, well, what does that mean? What does that look like? How do you know? It's so either we should just eliminate that waiver entirely, just get rid of it, or you just reduce this standard a little bit, you soften this standard so it's a little less strict, and maybe make the offset smaller.
Are those offsets that strict? They seem pretty reasonable to me.
It doesn't seem too bad, yet it seems like you wanted to give yourself an out.
We could,
I think we should just eliminate the second paragraph.
keep the numbers the way they are.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Okay.
A big building at 200 to 250 feet long at 20-foot setback isn't that much.
Agreed.
Okay, so it's not
I
a
think that's
set,
the right
it's an
approach.
offset,
Offset, yeah.
which means what? You're varying the plane,
Correct.
and how often, and we should think about, if you got a 200-foot building and you've got a 20-foot offset, well, how much of that length?
Oh, every 200 feet or yeah, right.
One offset per 200 feet.
I don't know.
Well, that was my point, as I don't know
I
either.
agree.
So
Yeah, I think it is every 200 feet because it says wall length, so it wouldn't be the same wall. 200 feet, then there's a wall bringing it, back 200 feet, like that. So it's
To help to help you understand this a little bit, the sentence that follows this table says the width of the offset shall be at least equal to the width of the building to which it is joined.
The width of it. Okay.
So you have to step back a certain distance, but that section should be as wide as the section that precedes it. There's some additional language here, and maybe we need to bring some clarity to this as well.
I think so.
Yeah.
We need a graphic.
Let's keep on.
There you go. A graphic.
Keep on tangling up threads here. Okay. All right.
I agree with Lynn. That second paragraph could be
Yeah.
eliminated.
Yeah, we can definitely eliminate that.
And
Yes.
then
We'll
clarify the
we'll
number.
fix that, and then we'll dig into the specifics of this regulation as well.
Good.
Okay. Rehab of existing buildings. This is a tough one because you clearly want to allow for your older buildings to be restored and rehabbed. I think you recognize the fact you need to allow for some flexibility. Yet at the same time, this language that you may modify is clearly problematic. So I don't know that we're going to solve this because this is a much bigger discussion. I don't know we're going to solve it in the next few minutes here. But I'm interested in hearing from you on if this is used and how it's used and what, what it is you're interested in allowing with respect to rehabilitation of existing buildings.
I can say it's a very valuable tool in the regulations, and over the years, it's led to a lot of rehabilitations of things like the former Mystic School, various buildings in Mystic, Pawcatuck. So getting it to work well seems to be important, and the density is the important thing. Being able to have the density, seems to be more important than the other bulk and buffer requirements there.
Would
But
it be
it is used a good deal.
I would postpone this discussion to another meeting.
A little late in the night, huh?
Yeah.
How many more slides do you have, Francisco? Maybe that's the question.
Yeah, fortunately, the last few will go real quick. I do have another 6 or so Mackenzie slides. So we'll just flag this for
Can we
future.
table that one?
Revisit. Yes, I think that's a good idea. And we can come back to it because the rest of these are most of them are pretty straightforward.
Okay, because we are in overtime, as they say.
Yes, we are. Open space development. We talked a little bit about this and can we try to wrap up by 9 o'clock? Will that work for everyone if we wrap up by 9?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I can
Sure.
land this by.
If I drop out, it's because the battery on my computer here, unfortunately, I'm in a spot where I don't have a charger. So I think I'm going to be able to make it to the end. But if I drop off here, it's because I lose flame in the battery.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody. Let's go.
All right, we talked about this a little bit last time about the requirement that open space sites as part of open space development be contiguous. And right now you allow yourself to waive the requirement if it's demonstrated that it'll achieve goals. How about we just eliminate this waiver option in favor of allowing no more than 2 unconnected areas?
Oh, okay. So
I think that could work as long as there's a minimum size for both areas. Like they must be at least 20%. Because I could see somebody putting a tiny little dot somewhere to get them over the hump.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, and minimum size being, I don't know, 20% of the larger area, or the total, 20% of the total area, no less than, is it?
I think that makes sense.
I'd agree with it.
Yeah, that gives it some leeway, yeah.
Yep.
All right, we'll try that on.
So the two areas are no less than 20%?
The smaller of the two
smaller-
areas.
The smaller of the two, either,
Smaller of the two.
which would be,
Thank you. Okay,
clearly would be the smaller of the two, would be no less than 20% of the total area.
okay, thank you.
Okay. We're coming back to parking again here. So here you give yourself permission to modify the parking regulations to increase required parking, that you may require an increase in parking up to 25% of the required minimum. There's quite a bit here. Here's the recommendation. Where the maximum number of parking spaces permitted by these regulations is demonstrated by a parking assessment, and this is the same parking assessment we talked about before, which you currently have the stipulations for that in the regulations, to be insufficient, the Planning and Zoning Commission shall permit an increase in the number of parking spaces up to 25% above the permitted maximum.
I'm good with it. I think it's clear.
Your regulations, you're a little bit progressive in your parking regulations, in that for certain uses, you identify the maximum of what's allowed. And that's kind of an emerging trend in parking regulation, is to identify an upper limit as well, to make sure parking isn't overbuilt. But once again, there's a need for some flexibility. You're already giving yourself 25%, but you're leaving it that unqualified. So here we put it back on the applicant to demonstrate through a delivery of a parking assessment that they need that extra, in which case you're removing your discretion from it. We're saying you shall permit them to provide up to 25% above.
Keith, you all right with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
The way it was worded before makes it seem like the commission can come back 10 years later and say, you know what? We're demanding you need to provide more parking.
Right, okay, sounds good.
Okay, good. Another modification. So that we just talked about maximum. Now this is on the minimum side of the equation. So where the minimum number of parking spaces required by these regulations is demonstrated by a parking assessment to be excessive, the Planning and Zoning Commission shall permit a reduction in the number of parking spaces up to 25% below the required minimum.
That makes sense, because it's kind of the mirror image of what we just we agreed with. So
It's and it's what you currently allow. You just make it discretionary instead of compelled, and also you don't explain how it is that you arrive at that. And here it's by the applicant demonstrating, and it's the mirror. And this ties right back in with the highway interchange zoning as well that we talked about earlier.
Okay.
So, Francesca, are these last two limited to the highway interchange, exit 92?
No, this is universal.
Or is it anywhere?
Yeah, this is applicable to all districts. It was called out specifically for that one zone before, but these two are applicable to all districts.
Are we creating some sort of an incentive for developers to hire bring in a hired gun to give a parking assessment that fits whatever he wants to do? I mean, I'm thinking of traffic studies, and we're going to have a bunch of parking assessment experts that justify whatever a developer wants to do?
I mean, to an extent, we already do require that for a lot of things, these parking assessments.
Yeah,
So it's not a new thing in our regulations.
is it abused?
I don't think it's abused, but I think, there's still the commission's discretion that it has to come down to.
Okay. Okay.
'Cause,
So
you
let me ask
might
you
just look
this,
at it and say it doesn't make sense.
so now are we always for these last two where there's going to be some modification, the requirement is a professional parking assessment, an outside parking assessment? Is that now the requirement? If you go for these last two, either more or less, you have an
Correct.
outside
Correct.
parking assessment done?
Yeah, you have it exactly right. If they want to be outside of your standard, whether it's up to 25% more or 25% less, they need to conduct a study to demonstrate why it is they have that need.
Okay, and so let me just say this, because I think this came up recently in one of our discussions in one of the applications, where we asked that the town designate who does the independent assessment. It wasn't for parking, I think it was traffic study, but the town indicated who would do it. The applicant still had to pay for it.
Right, right. Okay.
That would help get a much more
Bias.
unbiased, independent
Yeah.
assessment. You're right.
Yeah, I think we did do that for something recently that came up. So
Okay.
maybe we want to put that somewhere in the regulation. It's town designated
Yep.
independent parking assessment.
I don't know, with most things, applicants are free to hire their own consultants, like if they have their environmental expert. We often hire sort of an outside review person to perform a review if we think it's necessary. But with these
We
parking
do?
reductions,
Well,
Yeah.
Keith, have you ever seen a traffic study that wasn't exactly what the developer wanted? I mean, and I think you're facing the same thing here, where a developer hires somebody who's going to make an assessment that is exactly what the developer wants.
yeah, in a case like that, we could have it reviewed by our own third-party consultant. But I mean, for us to, because this is part of their application, where they come in and their application has this parking assessment that's already done by them.
So if we disagree, we would get another opinion.
Right, right.
Then we pay for that, I suspect.
Yeah, probably.
We could. I mean, our applications say that we can charge the applicant for third-party reviews for things too.
That's
Oh,
what I thought.
Because a lot of times the parking study might be done by the engineer who's already working on their plans, which makes sense. And if we question it, then we can question it. We can have an outside review.
I'm all right with that, if that still sticks.
Yeah, and these parking analysis, they are already a requirement of parking reductions in our regulations. They're not a requirement for shared parking applications, but that's a different story.
Is that phase 2?
Probably.
Shared parking? Yep.
So this slide that Francisco has up and the next one are a little different. They're both about modifications to the parking regulations, but the one that's up now, the 7.1022, is excessive parking and phased parking, and which it basically says that the commission can reduce the amount of parking for something if an area of land is set aside for future parking if necessary. And that's pretty rare that someone has all that extra space. So the next slide, that's 710-3, parking reductions, is the one you see more, where someone just says, I want to do this business. The parking regulations are excessive. I'd like to get up to a 40% reduction in the parking spaces. That's the one that's more common.
And so how, if it's my understanding, excessive face parking, it's limited as to what that applies to. How would we handle this item, point 2 here, or point 1, I guess, the
Yeah.
reduction of parking shall not exceed 40%.
So this whole section couldn't be eliminated really because it's a different
Yeah.
thing than the previous slide.
Right, right.
So there'd have to be some way to reword this.
Okay.
We table this one?
Yeah, so let's,
Getting
okay.
close to
Yeah,
cocktail
it's
hour.
all connecting. This is all part, I think we're halfway there on our way to a solution. So I think it's
Yes,
a matter
okay.
of taking the same approach with this. And I think what we need to argue about at our next meeting is this percentage.
Yes.
Whether or not that should be reduced to 25%. 40% seems like a really big fungible number.
Okay. To be determined.
Okay, all right.
So there's just two other things to be considered there. Maybe you want to make a note. The first one is point 2. Granted for operations with high turnover of parking use. You know, we've had a lot of debate on businesses lately as to what that turnover rate is. And also when it says in section 3 that it's customer parking and parking for employees must be provided or required by the use. So when it's a restaurant, there seems to be a lot of discussion as to how many employees the restaurant will have. And so I don't know if we make a table with that number based on the number of tables or patrons, but it does seem to come up a lot in our discussions with restaurant parking.
Yeah, restaurant parking is one of the most, particularly if that restaurant serves alcohol and has a bar. It's probably one of your most intensive uses, and it's always squeezed into a building and a property that just doesn't have nearly enough parking to potentially accommodate it. It's one of the most challenging uses to accommodate.
So maybe by, instead of, you know, maybe having a table and saying something like, listen, if you've got 10 seating 10 tables with, you know, 100 people, I'm making it up, you have to assume you're going to have such and such, you know, number of staff per table, or I don't know.
The other alternative, which I've always been in favor of, is just not regulating the employee parking and just having parking standards that assume that there will be a certain number of employees already. So we don't have the enforcement issue of counting employees, and then restaurants have a disincentive to actually hiring staff when they need to hire staff.
I couldn't agree with you more, Keith, that we try to move away from head counts and table counts and chair counts, because all those things are, they can fluctuate wildly, and it's very difficult to measure. And we try to move just towards square foot measurements with assumptions built in about how many staff you typically have per square foot and how many patrons you would have. All right, and we're, you know, I think we'll revisit your parking numbers and those requirements in the second phase of this work. Right now, we're just trying to plug those holes, these discretionary items. So we can come back to this. Modifications to the parking regulations. This off-site parking basically at your discretion. So can we instead just have required parking for non-residential uses under circumstances be located off-site and it's just subject to just allow it, right? Rather than under certain circumstances. Or rather than at discretion, just allow it on its face.
And then the following requirements would get it into the specifics of that.
Yeah, all the requirements would lay it out. So just get rid of the may allow and just allow off-site parking provided all the requirements are met.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Says
to
it
me.
more clearly.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
Great.
All right. Couple more. Once again, may waive. This is loading requirements. Let's just change may to shall.
For it.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay. Parking lot design may be waived. Once again, we'll just have the applicant demonstrate that the adjacent topography, other factors, including road right of way, provide sufficient protection.
Yeah, agreed. It puts a burden of proof on them.
Right. Okay.
Good.
And then finally, this last one, landscaping requirement may be reduced or waived for telecommunication facilities. Let's just say in locations where the visual impact of the tower will be minimal, a landscape buffer shall not be required.
We even have any say in that with the siting council?
Yeah, you do it. They can pick where they put something, but you can have certain standards regarding what they do around the edges.
Oh, okay. Yes, I'm for that.
Yeah, agreed.
I'm fine with it.
Okay. All right, so we got through the meat of it. What we've gotten started with are just updating your graphics. So these aren't real big changes. Just trying to give them a consistent look. The existing is on the left, and try to make it so it fits the page a little better and just a little cleaner. That's the direction we're going with all these, taking your existing, just updating it. I think a lot of the graphics are pretty effective. We just want them to read a little bit better, the font to be a little bigger maybe, a little less clutter with them. So example, existing on the left and just a zoomed in version on the right.
Does look cleaner. Yeah.
Same drawing, just a little cleaner. Because the drawings I think are effective. We want them just to present a little better. They're very tiny right now on the page, many of them. So we want to make sure they blow up to proper look. And then start to develop new graphics. By example, this graphic, which shows which are the required yards and in relationship to the property lines, frontage, street line. So we want to start developing some new graphics that help communicate these other design concepts that don't currently exist in the regulations. So that's something we'll be flagging items that we think would benefit from graphics and getting, reviewing that with you and then as we have agreement on what you need graphics for, we'll start to develop those.
Okay.
All right, our next steps, we've been continuing to migrate your regulations into the new format that we all agreed upon. And we've already done Article 1 because we provided you a sample of that last month. We're working on the definitions, and we've started migrating the use regulations into the new format, which involves taking your many list of uses that are scattered throughout each district and consolidating those into one table that's up to date and accurate. You do have a table in your regs right now, but there are a lot of inconsistencies and inaccuracies. So we're putting that all into new tables. So I expect in advance of our next meeting, we'll be able to share a draft of Article 1, Article 2, and Article 7, our definitions, with you for your review at least a few days prior to the meeting. That way, as I walk you through those, you've had a chance to get familiar with them, and we can just talk about whether or not things are appearing as they should. So we'll use the December meeting for that and to follow up on some of these open items from tonight. In January, I'd like to come back to you with Articles 3 through 6. And we have 7 articles in total. Articles 3 through 6 deal with bulk area and height, the districts themselves, and other regulatory standards, including floodplain, signage, and a lot of those other permit requirements, et cetera. So we'll come to you in January with a draft of those, and it's my same intention to get you those drafts well in advance of the meeting so you have a chance to review it, because now that we're at the point where we have some product, we want to get that to you to review. And then February, I think if we maintain the progress we've been making, when we come to February, we can put that all together into a draft of the regulations. Now, it may be that we have 50 different items that are flagged that still we need to come to agreement on, but we'll have it all in the new format and all in one place so you can see it all together. So that's my goal for February. So with that being said, December, our regular meeting would fall on the 27th, being the 4th Tuesday. I was planning on taking that week off. That being said, I'm not going anywhere, so I'm happy to do an evening meeting, but I know a lot of you may have travel schedules as well. So is there any chance we could try to pin down our next meeting night while we're all here together?
Would the 20th be better?
We have a regular meeting.
You have a regular meeting, sorry, yeah.
I mean, the 27th works for me.
And me.
Yeah, it works for me too.
I can do it. I just know for some people that they're checked out that week.
I can do it.
Yeah, I can't commit to the 27th.
I can do it.
Okay. And Keith, that date works for you?
Yeah, I can do it.
All right, let's just keep our regular date then. And then what I will do, and I'll write this down now so we make sure get it to you, is I will look to get those drafts to you by the 19th. Those drafts I just talked about for your review, realizing you folks are going to want to have a few days off that week. Does that work if we get those drafts to you by 12/19?
Yeah, that works for me. Yeah.
Yep. That's good.
Okay, so our next meeting, December 27th at 6:30 still work?
Yeah, I like it. Works.
At 6:30, and that is our 4th Tuesday, and that concludes our meeting. Thanks for sticking it out. I realize we went pretty long tonight, but thank you.
That's just great. That was good.
Thank you.
Yep. Keith, anything else?
Thank you.
No, that's it for me.
Okay.
Motion to adjourn.
All right. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Thank
Happy
you.
Thanksgiving.
Yes, happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.